Please compare Western and Eastern pole weapons.
Eastern, not Eastern pole weapons, but Eastern,
no, not
as in
Eastern.
not Western.
Eastern. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and here we are with Matt Easton.
Ciao!
Ciao! Hey folks, Matt Easton.
Hi noble ones, good to meet you.
So I'm here in England, and we are at the, what castle is this?
Arundel Castle in West Sussex.
Yeah. Fantastic, it's a lovely day. We've got sunshine, believe it or not.
Yeah, pretty good for England.
We are here in Britannia, and we decided to talk a little bit, do a little bit of a Q&A. So Matt Easton has got some interesting questions.
Yeah, so I put up on my channel basically asking for questions and answers that you would like answered by Raf and myself. Yeah, so the next question is from Eques de Ventusus.
I'm glad you read it.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I can't say your name better without a lot more practice. But it says, as Roman styles of weapons were always evolving, how would you two see the Gladius evolve in a world of military sabres and small swords if they had survived into the 17th or 19th century? Well, I think exactly the same thing would have happened. So the Gladius, generally speaking, was replaced by the Spatha.
Yeah.
So the late Roman period, they switched to using the Spatha, and then from the Spatha, the Germanic tribes of migration era Europe were using something like a Spatha. I've actually talked about this on my channel a bit, but you know, similar length, similar style cut and thrust sword. That led into the later early medieval kind of the knight's single-handed arming sword, and so on. I don't think anything would have changed. Basically, I just think the Roman gladius would have always disappeared.
Yeah, because
warfare changed.
It was good for what it was created for, but then weapons change depending on the how the armor and tactics of your opponents change. In fact, even the Romans changed things a lot if you look at the whole Roman history. So at the end of the day, yeah, it wasn't an effective weapon anymore. So,
and obviously it's a very, very big topic, and one that we won't go into fully here, but I personally think, maybe we could do a discussion video about this in the future, but I personally think that the gladius only makes sense with the large scutum.
Oh yeah.
And once you start to get the later period, the flat oval shields that they start to use, that leads into the boss grip shields of the migration era, then you want a longer sword because the legs become vulnerable, and it's a different style of fighting. But the scutum is what dictates the style of the sword, in my opinion.
Absolutely. In fact, even whether it be war or whether it be gladiatorial combat, the gladius is almost invariably connected with the scutum, with exception with the macairus. There's dual wielding, but that's for show, if you ask me.
Brilliant.
Next one. Can you read the thing?
Yeah, so Theodore Freitag, is that a reference to Red Sonja? I think it might be, but anyway, Theodore Freitag says, I'd like to know more about the Dacian falx and how it was used. It looks like a sabre, I'll come back to that point, and was used during Roman times, so this should unite the knowledge of you both. Interesting. Well, it kind of does. So first up, I'll say we don't know an awful lot about the falx. There were two types of falx. There was a one-handed one and a two-handed one. I know that much. The two-handed one being much bigger than the one-handed one, was usually used with a shield. And it was used in Dacia, most famously, as featured on Trajan's column, which you've seen in Rome, I guess.
I love it.
I don't think I recall seeing it in Rome, but there's a replica of it in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, if anybody is coming to London and wants to see Trajan's column. And the first thing I would say is it's not like a sabre, it's like a bill. It's like a bill hook. So the medieval equivalent of the Dacian falx really is the bill hook.
Well, that's interesting though, because we see that the Romans reacted to it, and they changed their equipment. The most famous part is the manica, the metal protection.
So it's like a
striking arm.
Sleeve, isn't it?
Yeah, but
overlapping.
Overlapping.
So I've seen replicas of those that were leather, and I've seen replicas that were metal.
Yes, on the metal or leather there is a massive. There are a few schools of thought. There's a massive, even for the lorica segmentata, the lorica laminata. Some people did say it could have been leather. I don't support that. I think it would be metal because of the Corbridge and the Newstead, and even some other archaeological findings in Spain that were all metal. So to me, I don't think it would be leather, and I don't think that would be leather either. Fabrica Cacti, they make a splendid replica of a Manica, which is like very tight fitting and everything. It's very, very beautiful, and it's interesting how articulated it is for the time. And yes, it came from gladiatorial combat. So what are some of the advantages, do you think, of that sort of weapon?
Well, I mean, the falx it's a little bit like the Danax, isn't it? The two-handed one, anyway. It's or the bill, indeed, like the bill hook. It's a weapon that's a very powerful chopper, and the fact that it's got this forward curving. Sort of inner curve to the edge, but with a point as well.
Yes.
We know, or I pretty sure I remember that around the Dacian campaign and in the aftermath, the Roman helmet's got a crosspiece on the top to try and prevent against penetration of the helmet, potentially against these points. One of the advantages of having a point as well as an edge is that a point is always better to penetrate armour than an edge is. An edge generally can't penetrate plate armour like a helmet, but a point, like a warhammer, can, because it concentrates the force, of course. So I think you've got a double advantage there. You've got the point and you've got the edge, and of course the edge is very effective against any other bit of the body that isn't armoured, and the point's very useful against the armoured bit. In terms of the one-handed one, I guess it's really just like a sword. I mean, it's a sword that's a good chopper. It's a bit like a kukri or a falcata, a good chopping sword.
And do you think that because of the shape it might be easier to bypass the scutum with it?
I personally don't think so, no, because at most what you'll be able to do is hook the edge of the scutum.
Okay.
So potentially they could have tried to, because the scutum is boss gripped, of course, by hooking the top of the scutum you could maybe pull it open. The only thing is, I would say, is having done that, you can't take advantage with a thrust, because you can't thrust with a falx.
Right.
And that's something really important to note about either version of falx, is you can't really thrust with them because they don't have a point. Essentially it's rounded at the tip because you've given up the point at the top to have a point at the front. So Dacian falx, very interesting. We don't know an awful lot about how they were used, other than that there was a two-handed one and there was a one-handed one, and the one-handed one was probably used with shields. But they were very formidable cutters, I think. Oh, and the Manica that you mentioned, they were taken from gladiators, weren't they? Was it? I'm trying to remember. Was it the Secutor? Which I can't. Not,
Secutor.
Secutor.
I think Secutor was using it. I'm trying to think if because the most armored, heavily armored gladiator is the. What is it called? Murmillo.
Yeah.
Yes.
I say it in the English way. It's the same word.
Yes.
Murmillo.
Murmillo. I think the Murmillo probably had it, but yeah, definitely got it from the gladiatorial games.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your question,
Good
Theodore.
Question. Thank you. Okay, so next one is, which one is it?
That one.
Luis Hector Parra de la Roche, whatever. Please compare Western and Eastern pole weapons.
Eastern, not Eastern pole weapons, but Eastern,
no, not
as in
Eastern.
not Western.
Eastern.
It's not that funny.
I would imagine like Japanese, Chinese, yeah.
So I think that basically you just find equivalent pole weapons in Asia as you do in Europe, don't you? So there are types of glaive, there are types of halberd, there are types of spear. Spears are everywhere.
Yes.
All humans have had spears going all the way back.
Very effective weapon.
Yeah, another, if we look at naginatas or the types of glaive you find in China, you've got similar things in Europe. There are axes on poles in both. I've seen pictures, Japanese art, which show long-handled axes, even though axes are fairly uncommon in Japan, but you do get them.
As a weapon, yeah.
So basically, they're all kind of equivalent, aren't they? And the dominant ones are always spears, aren't they?
Are. In fact, Yari, for example, but I do have a question, because there is one kind of pole weapon, if we want to call it that way, which is the nagamaki, which is very similar to a naginata, but the difference is it's like the perfect in between a sword and a pole weapon. It's like 50-50. 50% handle, 50% blade. I know, it's a bit of a strange one.
So funnily enough, actually, this weapon came up in. I did a video talking about Game of Thrones and the ice walkers, whatever they're called, that use frozen swords that are a similar, similar proportion. They're a longish blade, like a sword length blade, but with a very long handle.
Yes.
That's not as long as a pole weapon, but longer than most swords. That's quite an unusual weapon.
Maybe it's a bit unique.
Yeah, you do find equivalents in Europe.
Yes.
There's something called an Allspice, which I'm terribly sorry that I don't pronounce it very well. But some of them have quite short handles, and there's a certain type of dueling type which has like a handle about this long, about the same length as the blade. So you do find those, and obviously you get them in Japan.
You get them in Japan, and then if we continue, since you mentioned Game of Thrones, a similar weapon is used by the elves in the Lord of the Rings.
That's right. Yeah.
They have very similar to the nagamaki.
Yeah. So again, you find things like, and even in India, there's a type of weapon. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there's a weapon in India which equally has a blade about the length of a normal sword, but then the handle is as long as the blade. So there are many different cultures which have had this type of weapon. It never seems to have been a popular weapon.
No, it was special, exotic.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems to have existed in various cultures with slightly different designs. And so the first one we picked out has come from Baccabozza. We've decided that this is an Italian person. It could be Baccabozza, I don't know, but Baccabozza says...
Yes, he says, what was armoured combat like in medieval Japan? And that's a very good question. It relates to European medieval combat because, for example, there are some styles of kenjutsu that deal with that, and for example, Katori Shintoryu is one of these. Now, I can't really speak specifically about the techniques of Katori Shintoryu, but definitely medieval combat in armour, particularly, is he asking medieval in general?
In medieval
Japan.
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't really use medieval for Japan.
No.
Some people do, some people don't. It's just one of those things.
Because that means middle age, and for Japan it's not a middle age relative to anything else.
Anything else. I think it's better to say feudal Japan, in fact.
But which would cover 16th century in that case.
It does, and when we say 16th century, like the suit of armour that I have, that my viewers know, and then of course I would say in a way it is rather similar to the way you fight armoured knights, because you go for the gaps, and that's the same in Japan.
I mean, my view, I've done a little bit of kendo, but I haven't studied any traditional kenjutsu. But I have friends that have, and obviously I've studied the European stuff. I think there is a bit of difference. So people often compare armoured fighting in Japanese martial arts and European martial arts because there are parallels, but equally there are differences, and we shouldn't ignore those. Japanese armour is not as all-encompassing as European plate harness is. So for example, cutting, they used to do cutting tests on kabuto, didn't they, on the helmets. So I think cutting is still quite important in Japanese armoured fighting, whereas it's not really important in European armoured fighting.
Yeah, and you can cut, for example, on the thigh, or for example. Now, it is also true, though, that there are some auxiliary items of armour in samurai armour that can fill some gaps.
Yeah.
So you've got like things that you can wear that protect you, like similar to the way a placard works, but underneath you can have something that protects your armpit with at least mail or other things, or like so like plates. So there are ways to make samurai armour more protective.
But on a big scale, Baccabozza's question, what was armoured combat like in medieval Japan? A bit similar to European, so there would have been a lot of grappling, I think this is something that movies and computer games and stuff like this kind of don't really get, is that if there's lots of armour involved, then the fight is very often going to come very close. Because you can't just hit someone and they just fall down dead most of the time. It's quite difficult to kill someone wearing lots of armour. So often you might wound them, but then you'll come into a clinch and you might pull daggers out or knives, tanto, and start fighting at very, very close range. So grappling, indeed, very important in both Japanese feudal martial arts and medieval European martial arts.
And another thing is interesting is that when you need to try and subdue a knight, and you want to, for example, take him to the ground,
he
open
said
the
subdue,
helmet.
not seduce. Incidentally,
No.
I was wondering if he was about seducing a knight.
No, I'm not interested in seducing knights. Maybe ladies, but not knights. But if you put him on the ground, you open the visor up, and you're using a rondella, for example, a dagger to get through, or maybe through the eye slits and something like that. Well, something like this is done in Japanese as well. You always carry your wakizashi and shorter tanto.
I mean, the other thing to mention, of course, is a lot of their primary weapons, both in Europe and in Japan, would have been a pole weapon. So naginata or yari very often would be the primary weapon for a samurai. Just as the same in medieval Europe, it would have been a pole axe or a spear, something like this. And some of those weapons are long enough and have enough leverage that you might be able to put someone straight out of combat just by hitting them really hard. So if you hit someone as hard as you can with a naginata or with a pole axe in the head, the fact that they've got a helmet on might not save their neck from being broken.
Indeed, Okay, we've got one last question. Very important.
From Black Arrow Forge, bald versus long hair. Well, I think it's a completely valid question. I would argue for bald, definitely. and you'd probably argue for bald as well. No,
Well, no, because you see, fortune favours the bold. So I think
fortune favours the bald. No, so what I was going to say was actually in a combat situation,
Yeah.
I would say there's pluses and minuses. Hair, amazing shock absorbers, okay?
With
And we
helmets.
know, we know that people used to wrap up hair underneath their helmets for padding. We know that, for example, Sikhs have turbans around the hair, very difficult to cut through. On the other side, in an MMA environment, for
grabbing,
example,
yeah.
we know that grabbing of hair in the early days of UFC and stuff like that, people were being pulled around by their ponytails.
Yeah.
So bad in that scenario. And we know that the London prize fighters of the 18th century, both boxing and backsword, used to shave their heads like me. If you look up James Figg, because for the same reason, because it was more practical in a kind of prize fighting situation. So advantages
That's it.
to both. So basically,
Yeah.
with us, you get the full package.
Full package, mate. Thank you for watching.
Cheers, folks.
Nice one, we did it.